questions they want to put to me to fill in the next 3.5 minutes, then the chat box is open. I hope you know what that means. So if you type your questions in the chat box, then I'll pick up on those. So any questions, do bung those in. So I'll go through all the questions that people have kindly sent in. If you've got time at the end, I will talk about oxygen. But if you haven't got time at the end, Katie's here. Well done, Katie. I knew you'd be one of the prompt ones. Thank you for joining us. For people who don't know who Katie is, Katie and Craig between them run the Facebook group and also Natural Health Worldwide. So they are essential members of the team. Righty-ho. And also, Martin's very brilliantly activated something called captions. So if you can't hear what I'm saying, it's being typed out as I speak. So you can do that. Okay, somebody's asked, I take Dr. Wilson's adrenal rebuilder when I relapse. Is this okay? I'm ashamed to say I don't know what Dr. Wilson's adrenal rebuilder is, but I can't imagine it's anything too awful. And you're absolutely right. Adrenal fatigue is a common issue. So if you find that's helpful, that's good enough for me. You take it. My favorite adrenal herbs would be ashwagandha and ginseng, 1 to 3 grams a day of each, roughly. And also pregnenolone, 50 milligrams. DHEA 50 milligrams. And when you take DHEA and pregnenolone, always take them sublingually. You take them under the tongue, they dissolve in the mouth, they get absorbed into the systemic circulation, and they get past what's called the first pass circulation of the liver. If you swallow things, those things go to the liver and they're detoxified. If you take them sublingually, they go straight into the systemic bloodstream. So effectively, you get more bang for your buck. Oh, Diana Reynolds, thank you very much. Renoff, thank you very much. That's very kind of you. My latest vitamin D was 343. I think we're coming on to that. And guess what? It's 8:29, so let's start. Now, the point about vitamin D is it has no toxicity in its own right. The only way vitamin D can cause you problems is by causing hypercalcemia, i.e. high levels of calcium. So if you wish to measure the biological impact of vitamin D, we need to look at your corrected calcium. It's a standard NHS blood test. There's nothing difficult about it. And my view is that the corrected calcium should lie somewhere between 2.35 and 2.55 millimoles per litre. And this is important because some people have vitamin D receptor resistance. So despite having high levels of vitamin D or a good intake of vitamin D, they still have low corrected calcium. And that tells us the vitamin D isn't hitting the spot. And for those people, I like to see them running high levels of vitamin D, maybe 250, 350 or whatever, in order to get around that blockage. A very good example of this is psoriasis. Psoriasis, and this is a wonderful paper, and I'm happy to share it with anybody. A wonderful paper came up looking at the treatment of severe psoriasis, 6 case histories. And guess what? I love case histories. Case histories are telling the truth. These are honest physicians that have seen a clinical problem, they put in place an intervention and seen a clinical result. And those case histories are always superior to placebo-controlled double-blind trials or whatever. And in those case histories, very often, psoriasis could be reversed with good doses of vitamin D, by which I mean at least 20,000 and for some up to 50,000 IU daily of vitamin D. But of course, as I mentioned earlier, the only toxicity of vitamin D is a corrected calcium, is the calcium levels go too high. So if you're going to take those sort of doses, you do need to check your calcium levels. Okay, so what we will do is instead of going through the webinar chat, people have very kindly sent in questions, which I've tried to put in some sort of logical order. And I've only spent 3 minutes doing this, so it's not brilliant. But let's go to that now. And I'm going to screen share so you can see the questions so I don't have to waste time reading them out. So there are the questions, and let's pick up those. Okay, so Diana's just asked about vitamin D, and I've started to talk about that. But vitamin D deficiency is pandemic. It's incredibly common. And my view is we should all be taking 10,000 IU of vitamin D daily, summer and winter. And the point here is that nobody has ever had any toxicity, complications, deaths, hypercalcemia from that dose of vitamin D. It's fabulously safe. And the reason it's fabulously safe is because it equates to about an hour of sunshine. And 1 hour of sunshine, well, primitive woman would have got 12 hours of sunshine, wouldn't she? Guess what? Today I was lucky to have 2 or 3 hours in the garden, and I got 3 hours of vitamin D. And the interesting thing about sunshine and vitamin D is as you increase the dose of sunshine, eventually production of vitamin D levels off. So it doesn't mean that if you get a lot of sunshine, you will get vitamin D toxicity or hypercalcemia. It doesn't happen. Once the body's got enough vitamin D, it knows and it switches off endogenous production. And that's why I like people to take vitamin D 10,000 IU regularly throughout the summer as well, because that, as I call it, base loads, and then you top up with whatever sunshine you can get. Okay, and the way that vitamin D insufficiency would affect ME, it affects ME and chronic fatigue syndrome in 2 different ways. Without vitamin D, you cannot absorb magnesium. And as we all know, magnesium is essential for mitochondrial function. So everybody should be taking at least 200 milligrams of magnesium, maybe 300 milligrams of elemental magnesium, and 10,000 IU of vitamin D with which to absorb that. And my experience is these days I rarely do magnesium injections, and because this regime works as well. And the other way to get magnesium on board is Epsom salt baths. I love Epsom salt baths. They're cheap and they multitask. So not only can we detox with Epsom salt bath, it also gives us a nice dose of magnesium, well absorbed through the skin, and a nice dose of sulfate, which helps us to detoxify. Okay, so let's look at Jacqueline Fraser's asked about diet. Switching in and out of ketosis. Okay, the point about ketosis is, well, first of all, it is the preferred fuel of mitochondria. And we can reverse so much pathology with the ketogenic diet. We can reverse diabetes, we can reverse dementia, we can slow down cancer, we can prevent heart disease. It's absolutely centrally important for recovering and not getting other nasty diseases. And the point here is that if we eat sugars and carbohydrates, the way the body stores those in the short term is in glycogen in the liver and glycogen in the muscles. And because sugar is such a dangerous fuel, the body will always burn sugar first and will always empty its glycogen stores before it moves into fat burning. Fat burning is like, I think of that as a deposit account at the bank. We always get, try and run our life on the current account. Not that that's a good policy to run our current account on sugar, I have to say. And but we always burn sugars first. And the reason we get rid of sugars first is because they're so dangerous. They are so toxic. And if you run a high blood sugar, it damages blood vessels, it drives dementia, it feeds cancer cells. So the point here is that if you are in ketosis, and you can measure if you're in ketosis with a ketone breath meter, and this is a very helpful, quick and easy tool to check. That tells me that you have emptied your glycogen stores, because the body will always burn sugar and glycogen in preference to ketones and short-chain fatty acids. So in answer to Jacqueline's question, as long as you're in ketosis once a day, then that's probably good enough for most. And the reason I say that is you can't eat enough carbohydrates, or it's very difficult to eat enough carbohydrates in a day to saturate your glycogen stores. So you might slip out of ketosis occasionally. That doesn't matter. So long as you're in ketosis most of the time, that's good enough for me. Okay, now your body adapts to ketosis. Okay, well, so when we do a ketogenic diet, when we cut out the sugars and the carbohydrates and we go into ketones, it takes a little while to get into fat burning. And the reason for that is because if you've been running your body on sugars and carbohydrates for years, by which I mean bread, potatoes, pasta, biscuits, crisps, all that sort of stuff, then your glycogen stores will be saturated. And glycogen stores can store maybe 1,700, 2,000 kilocalories of sugar at a time. So you'd have to fast for a whole day, or maybe a day and a half, or maybe 2 days to get into ketosis. Or you can do the ketogenic diet, and it maybe takes 5 or 6 or 7 days to get into ketosis. 1,700 calories will get a marathon runner to about 17 miles. And if the marathon runner is not keto adapted and doesn't have a sugar snack or on during the course of his run, at that point he hits a wall. He just runs out of fuel. So so long as you're in ketosis some of the time, then I'm a happy bunny. Okay, so and it's usually very straightforward. Now, if you struggle to get into ketosis, there are some common reasons for that. The first one is acetyl L-carnitine. You need carnitine to be able to shunt ketones and into to shunt acetyl-CoA into mitochondria to be burnt. So that's the first one. The second possibility is that you are short in vitamin B1, thiamine, and many people find that benfotiamine, 1 gram, is helpful. That helps them get into ketosis, so they tolerate that better. The third possibility is that you are hypothyroid. You have an underactive thyroid. Now, normally when we get into ketosis, we use thyroid hormones to fat burn. If you haven't got the thyroid hormones to fat burn, then you will fat burn with adrenaline instead. Now, that does allow you to fat burn, but adrenaline is the hormone that makes you feel wired but tired. So they are the three common reasons for struggling with the PK diet. So here we've got Mick Simpson, or Mick Simpson. I've ditched the PK diet to flare up to gout. Well, gout, as you all know, is due to high levels of uric acid. And uric acid comes from sugars, carbohydrates, and in particular, fruit sugar. So my guess, it also comes from protein. So my guess, Mick, is that you've done the PK diet, but you've done it with a high protein. And that protein has converted to uric acid, and that's why your gout has flared. But as I say, the paleo-ketogenic diet is not a high protein diet, it's a normal protein diet. So Mick, you need to go back to the PK diet. The PK diet is non-negotiable. Go back to PK diet, but don't have too much protein, and that should stop the gout flaring up. Now, the uric acid we also know is damaging to arteries. We also know that uric acid drives heart disease and other pathology. I like to see the levels below 300. And on a PK diet, that should be easy. But many NHS laboratories say that it's okay to have a level up to 450. I don't think so. At that point, you're risking gout and all the complications of that. Okay, Leslie, how do you heal the gut when you have heavy metal toxicity, yeast overgrowth, and cannot take probiotics? Well, the answer is you start off with what I call the groundhog chronic regimes. Now, yeast overgrowth, small bowel bacterial overgrowth, oxalate and histamine, those are all manifestations of the upper fermenting gut. So the starting point to heal your gut is to do the paleo-ketogenic diet, low carbohydrate diet, get into ketosis. Once you're on a low carbohydrate diet, then the yeast and the small intestinal bowel overgrowth settles down, because you are not feeding those microbes with the sugars and carbohydrates that they love to ferment. And you can supercharge that with vitamin C and iodine. Now, the joy of vitamin C and iodine is both contact kill all microbes. They're also extremely safe and extremely cheap, and do lots of other good things too. So we should all be taking at least, well, ideally about 5 grams of vitamin C in the day. It works better on an empty stomach if you can tolerate that. And as I say, that contact kills microbes in the upper gut. And by upper gut, I mean stomach, duodenum, jejunum, and small intestine, i.e. the sort of first 20 foot of gut. And then last thing at night, and you want to keep this next to your toothbrush, you want Lugol's iodine. That's my bottle of iodine. I keep iodine all over the place. It's on my desk. It's next to my toothbrush. I have it in the garden. And the reason I have it in the garden is because it's a brilliant treatment for insect bites. If you get stung by a wasp or a horsefly, and we're inundated with horseflies at the moment, mosquito, whatever, Put the iodine on, and it gets rid of the itch, the swelling, the inflammation instantly. But iodine, and again, like vitamin C, contact kills all microbes. The key to vitamin C and iodine is take them away from each other. Don't take them at the same time because they knock each other out. One is a reducing agent, the other is an oxidizing agent. One is an electron donor, the other is an electron receiver. Doesn't matter which is which. The point is, don't take them at the same time. Always separate them. And that is always the starting point to treat yeast overgrowth, small bowel bacterial overgrowth, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, oxalate and histamine sensitivity. And heavy metal toxicity, well, we can get rid of heavy metals. And guess what? Iodine chelates up and gets rid of heavy metals. So that's a great start. Vitamin C chelates up heavy metals, and that's a great start. Getting rid of the upper fermenting gut. One of the products of the upper fermenting gut is hydrogen sulfide. And one of the problems with hydrogen sulfide is that binds with heavy metals that you may have swallowed, ingested, inhaled, or whatever, and converts them to organic heavy metals, which are readily absorbed. So simply by sorting out your upper fermenting gut, you're going to greatly reduce your absorption of toxic metals. But it's always a good thing to ask the question why, or ask the question, have I got heavy metals? Because there's no point spending lots of money and time and effort on heavy metal detox regimes if they're not there. So let's measure them. And the way to measure them is with a urine test. Now, just measuring toxic metals in the urine won't tell you if you've got a heavy metal problem, because false negatives are common. So we have to do this test with the chelating agent. And the chelating agent I like to use is called Captamer, or DMSA. And a chelate comes from the Greek. It means a claw, and it literally grabs hold of the heavy metals, pulls them out in the urine so you can see them. If you want to get that test, if you want to do that test, drop me an email and we can set you up with the necessary to do that. Okay, Marion's asking, having the importance of a large variety of good microbes in the diet. Okay. Yes, we don't know much about the microbiome, but what we do know is that the more diverse it is, the greater the number of different microbes there are, then the healthier is our microbiome. Now, my guess is, and this is only a guess, but it's borne out by clinical experience, is that the microbiome is as varied as the gut is varied, i.e. all these microbes in the gut, which might be bacteria, they might be yeast, they might be viruses, which then predate on bacteria. They all have a particular food which they like to ferment best. And their numbers will vary, up and down very rapidly according to the diet. So the key to a healthy microbiome is to eat as varied a diet as you possibly can. That's number one. The second key to having a healthy microbiome is eat organic. Now, the most widely used pesticide is glyphosate. It's over 60% of all pesticides used. It's this nasty toxic molecule, which is an organophosphate. In America, it's estimated that sufficient glyphosate is sprayed on agricultural crops, which amounts to over 1 pound per member of the population in America. So 1 pound is about 500 grams. Perhaps not all of it gets into the food chain, but most of it does. Most of it does because glyphosate is often sprayed immediately prior to harvesting as a desiccant to dry out that crop so that less energy is spent on drying it out in grain stores. So what that means is that if the average American is consuming maybe 500, maybe 400 grams of glyphosate a year, that amounts to 1 gram every day. Now that glyphosate is a drug, and it acts like a drug, and that is at least tenfold higher than most prescription drugs, which are prescribed in milligram amounts. And the problem with glyphosate is that at least 54% of the microbiome is killed by glyphosate. So the single most important thing you can do for your microbiome is to eat as many different foods as you possibly can, eat seasonally. And that's one of the joys of having a garden at the moment. We're eating the remains of the leeks, a little bit of spring cabbage, a little bit of spinach left over in the polytunnel. We've got some lettuce coming through, a few new potatoes. But soon as the summer comes on, we will be eating sugar snap peas, broad beans, runner beans, a greater variety of crops. So eat seasonally is the best thing you can do. And to repopulate the large intestine with good microbes, okay. Yes, fecal bacteria or fecal microbial transplant is the only way to really change the microbiome. And the key is, if you are going to do that, then you need to use bacteria from a healthy donor. And if you're interested in that, contact me directly. I've set up a service to help people do that. There is a clinic in this country that offers this. That is the Taymount Clinic, which is based in Hitchin, but it's quite expensive. But I mean, I wouldn't consider doing that unless there were some obvious symptoms with the microbiome. I mean, we know pathology like Clostridium difficile, like ulcerative colitis, responds extremely well to fecal bacteria therapy. Some of you are probably aware of the work of Thomas Borody in Melbourne, in Sydney in Australia, who runs the Centre for Digestive Diseases there. He's demonstrated that fecal bacteria therapy is often helpful for people with chronic fatigue syndromes and ME, and I can send you that paper. But you wouldn't want to do that until all else had been done. You always treat the gut from the top downwards, and that means you start off with a paleo ketogenic diet, vitamin C and iodine to sort out the upper fermenting gut, and then you ask yourself what symptoms you've got left. Are you malabsorbing? Are you maldigesting? Do you need digestive aids? And you would only do fecal bacteria therapy as a last resort if you were still having gut symptoms that couldn't be explained by allergy, that couldn't be explained by upper fermenting gut symptoms. Okay. Can we be sure the food we eat and the consumption are utilized once arrived rather than okay? No, of course we don't know that for sure, but we have to work with nature, we have to work with evolutionary biology, and we have to work with what's biologically plausible, and also think about our purses, because to do those sort of tests are expensive. And with any clinical issue, 90% of the diagnosis comes from the history and the symptoms, and only 10% from the tests. So, that's an impossible question to ask because nobody has done that. But all we can do is do our best. Do our best with respect to a paleo ketogenic diet. Do our best with respect to sorting out the upper fermenting gut by dint of eating fermented foods like kimchi, sauerkraut. These are all going to be helpful to the microbiome. And then ask ourselves, how do we feel? And if we're not sure, then okay, perhaps do tests for vitamin K levels or B vitamin levels or whatever. But I have to say, I rarely do that test. Okay, I think I've answered some of that. Is it okay to untake this yourself with a poo for mate's child? Okay. On my website, there is if you go to the page, if you put in the search fecal bacterial therapy, you will find the work of Dr. Silverman. Now, Dr. Silverman is an American gastroenterologist, and he has developed a do-it-yourself method for fecal bacteria therapy. And what this means, and he describes in his paper how anybody can do this at home safely and effectively. So do have a look at that, and that will give you some ideas. And again, he details how you can do this properly. But the point is, if you're going to do this yourself, there's no point adding the poop to your own bowel if it's full of poop, of your own poop. You've got to empty it out first. And so the easiest way to do that is to take a large dose of Epsom salts, and that stimulates an osmotic diarrhea and empties your own gut. So what you do is you clear out your own microbiome, which we're assuming is unhealthy, and then you add in the donation. Okay, Anne has talked about asking about upper fermenting gut. Okay, well, you've got small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, but it's methane. It doesn't matter what it is that's fermenting. Now, I deliberately call this condition upper fermenting gut because it's not microbe specific. Upper fermenting gut could be fermentation by bacteria, which might be aerobic or anaerobic. It could be fermentation by yeast. But it doesn't matter what's causing it. The treatment is the same. You starve the little wretches out with the ketogenic diet, you kill them with vitamin C, and you kill them with iodine. That is the starting point. Sometimes intermittent fasting can be very helpful. And of course, I'm always trying new things. And these days, I'm eating all my food within a 6-hour window of time. And I think I'm sharper and I do feel better for it. But this is a very good treatment for the upper fermenting gut. Because if you eat all your food within a 6-hour window of time, it means you've then got, at least 18 hours, well, maybe a little bit less, maybe at least 16 hours of time when the upper gut is free from food and it can start to heal and repair itself. Now, we also know that intermittent fasting is good for other reasons. One of our major defenses against disease, especially cancer, is autophagy or self-eating. And autophagy, or however you like to pronounce it, is switched on after about 16 hours of fasting if you are already in ketosis. Now, of course, if you're running on sugars and carbs, then it takes a day or two to burn through all those sugars and carbs. So it's not going to work for sugars and carbs. But once you're on a ketogenic diet, after 16 hours of no food, autophagy switches in. Now, autophagy was first described fairly recently, and the guy who, I can't remember his name, who described it, won the Nobel Prize for his research. But autophagy is how the body gets rid of old cells, cells that are out past their sell-by date, cells that are malfunctioning, and also cancer cells. We're throwing up cancer cells all the time. And autophagy is how we get rid of them. And this is why the ketogenic diet and intermittent fasting is highly protective against cancer. So, but it's also very good for the upper fermenting gut. And guess what? What we also know about the upper fermenting gut is it's a cancerous situation. Because if you've got bacteria or yeast in the upper fermenting gut, that will be driving cancer, stomach cancer, esophageal cancer, and almost certainly large bowel cancer, and maybe cancers otherwhere. So, Anne, okay, what you're doing here, it may well have followed ciproxin, that's a possibility. PPIs are a disaster. They are my most hated, or one of my most hated drugs, because they block stomach acid. And stomach acid is essential for digesting protein, for absorbing minerals, and for sterilizing the upper gut. So, of course, if you're on PPIs, I can almost guarantee you will end up with an upper fermenting gut and all the complications that that result from that. Okay, but all these drugs, aren't really getting, herbal antimicrobials may be useful. Magnesium oxide, it's a cathartic. It's not a good, well-absorbed form of magnesium. It can help with constipation, but the way to treat constipation is get back to root causes. Why have we got constipation in the first place? Is it allergy? Is it low thyroid, underactive thyroid? Is it too little fiber in the diet? Is it dehydration? So, I'm not enthusiastic about magnesium oxide. Keto.pass with feels okay. Well, we have to. This is a common reason for people to not like the keto diet. And the point is you have to start low and go slow. So start with low dose of fat and gradually build them up. Maybe use digestive enzymes, maybe use bile salts in order to help you digest them. But you must get into ketosis. As I say, that's it's non-negotiable, really and truly. Going through a bad patch, could a stool transplant help? No, we're not going to do that until we sort out the upper fermenting gut. We have to do that. And muscle weakness is part of poor energy delivery mechanisms. And if you've got upper fermenting gut, you're going to malabsorb. If you malabsorb, your mitochondria aren't going to function. So it's back to basics. We have to do it all. Okay, some thyroid questions here. The perimenopause can trigger ME/CFS. Now, I think the mechanism of this is the underactive thyroid. This is a very common way for the underactive thyroid to present. And the reason for this is because female sex hormones give us false energy. They give us the sensation we've got energy when actually we really haven't. So it allows us to spend energy that we really don't have. And when those female sex hormones disappear, we crash. And as I say, we should be getting energy from, paleoketone, the fuel in the tank, the mitochondrial engine, oxygen, and then the thyroid accelerator pedal and the adrenal gearbox control our mitochondria. And if we haven't got those thyroid hormones, then yes, we will go slow. As I say, it can be masked by female sex hormones. So yes, perimenopause can trigger ME/CFS, and I think the mechanism of that is the underactive thyroid. Now, as some of you may know, I've produced a book called The Underactive Thyroid, or rather, I beg your pardon, Craig and I have produced a book. Apologies, Craig, I hope you're not listening to this. And the subtitle of it is Do It Yourself Because Your Doctor Won't. Now, I know it's a very naughty subtitle, and I'm quite sure I will be complained about by endless doctors, but that is the truth of the matter. And my experience with doctors is they are obstructive. Very often people go and see their GP or an endocrinologist and say, I think I'm underactive because of these symptoms. And the doctors only look at the blood test. They ignore the symptoms. They look at the blood test. Oh, no, it's within normal range. You're okay. It's not a thyroid problem. Off you go. And they miss a proper diagnosis. So this is why you have to do it yourself. So what I suggest you do, Jacqueline, is get the book, and that will tell you exactly how you can treat that. Okay. Mary, and all those symptoms you'll describe, by the way, fatigue not helped by rest, post-exertional malaise, disturbed sleep, that's often a thyroid issue, poor temperature control, ditto, sound, these are all poor energy delivery symptoms. Okay, Mary, my blood test when I was diagnosed with Graves showed a suppressed TSH. Now, it's not pituitary insufficiency. With Graves' disease, you produce antibodies which initially stimulate the thyroid gland, so it becomes overactive and eventually destroy it. So this is not pituitary insufficiency. And then you went on to carbimazole. Okay. Okay, we've not given me the figures here, so I'm not quite sure what the figures are. But again, my guess is that you're being underdosed. And you need to see the book, which tells you, as I say, how you can do it yourself. Okay, David asked me, can hyperbaric oxygen cause oxidative stress in the mitochondria? I really don't think so. It improves oxygen delivery to mitochondria. And is hyperbaric oxygen therapy good for cognitive decline? The answer is it may be, but cognitive decline is part of energy delivery mechanisms. Now, hyperbaric oxygen is hard work. You've got to find a clinic, you've got to travel there, you've got to sit in a queue, you've got to go down to a pressure, you've got to come back up. It's very time consuming. And there's no point doing that until you've got in place all other energy delivery mechanisms. Now, if you've got time at the end of this, I'll talk about the importance of oxygen. And yes, of course, we need oxygen for mitochondria, for them to burn acetyl ketone bodies aerobically. And but the oxygen's got to be delivered there on hemoglobin, and we've got to ensure that oxygen can get from hemoglobin into the tissues. And a common reason for that not happening is hyperventilation, breathing, overbreathing. Hopefully you've got time for that. But I say, in answer to your question, yeah, it might be good for cognitive decline, but there's no point in doing it until you've got all else in place. And when you've got all else in place, the diet, the upper fermenting gut, the mitochondria, the thyroid, and the adrenals, you probably won't need the hyperbaric oxygen. Okay, Helen, what's your view on urolithin as a mitopure to treat mitochondria? I have no experience of using that. I mean, there so often these products get thrown out on the back of treating poor mitochondrial function. Now, as many of you may know, Dr. John McLaren Howard, Professor Norman Booth from Oxford, have published 3 papers on mitochondrial function. And the first paper demonstrated that mitochondrial failure is a central pathophysiological lesion in people who've got fatigue syndromes and ME. And the third paper demonstrated that if you put in place the necessary regimes, keto diet, and then the supplements to help mitochondria, and the important ones are magnesium, CoQ10, acetyl-L-carnitine, and vitamin B3, and maybe D-ribose. If you put in place those interventions and detox the mitochondria and get the control mechanisms right, you can improve mitochondrial function. So I'm always a bit worried about these products like Mitopure, which cost a small fortune and make great claims. You know, I always suspect that it might be somebody's pension plan. I want supplements that are cheap, everybody can access, and affordable. So I don't know about Mitopure. I've not used it, and I don't know about it. What I do know is the interventions that we are advocating work reliably well. Okay, don't know the answer. What's your view on NT factors or treatment for mitochondria? Again, you know, don't start with the esoteric, start with the basics. I don't have any experience using NT factor. It's rather expensive. So the answer is I don't know. MitoQ, same answer as Mitopure. What's your view on using high dose B1 thiamine? Well, we know B1 thiamine, and it needs to be as the fat soluble form, which is benphthiamine, allows us to burn sugar much more efficiently. And very often people who take benphthiamine, well, we know it reverses diabetes, for example. We know it's a very good treatment for Parkinson's disease, and that's a proven, that's lots of very good work done by an Italian physician called Dr. Costantini. But it often helps people with the keto diet because it enables them to burn sugar more efficiently and therefore to get into ketosis. So yeah, I'm a fan of that. Okay. Susan Faraday, the heart failure and ME and cardiac supplements that can help. Well, it's all the stuff we've talked about. You know, heart failure is, well, it can be a number of things, but most commonly, it's poor mitochondrial function in the heart. And you can reverse heart failure with all the stuff we've been talking about: magnesium, CoQ10, vitamin B3, carnitine, acetyl-L-carnitine, D-da. Virginia Crawford, is it possible to build up magnesium levels too high via injection? No, absolutely not. You can't overdose with magnesium injections. You can't overdose with Epsom salt baths. They're both great ways to get your magnesium level up. And the reason for this, we go back to evolutionary biology, because from an evolutionary perspective, we had an abundance of leafy green vegetables, nuts and seeds, you know, and good quality meat. And those foods are rich in magnesium. So the kidney did not evolve systems for hanging on to magnesium. So if you have too much magnesium, you just pee it out. Now, there is one case in the literature of a child who developed cardiac dysrhythmias due to magnesium. And this was because their parents thought that it was very good for the child to give her magnesium or Epsom salt enemas. Now, the large bowel is not very discriminating about what it absorbs, because usually it's an area to be for where stuff is got rid of, not where stuff is absorbed. And that child developed cardiac dysrhythmia, which was ascribed to magnesium poisoning from Epsom salt enemas. So that's the only department where you can run into problems. But taking magnesium orally, you cannot overdose. Why? Because if you take too much, you get diarrhea. You can't overdose taking it through the skin, transdermally, and the magnesium injections contain so little magnesium that just is not going to be a problem. Okay, any ideas for helping mast cell activation? Okay, well, mast cell activation is not a diagnosis, it's a symptom. And I'm just going to quickly share my page on my website. I hope you can see this. And there's a page called, excuse me, mast cell activation syndrome. And this details how mast cell activation is not a diagnosis, it's a symptom. And I'm not going to go through all this because it would take me all the evening, but do look at this page. And this tells us what it is, how we can diagnose it from the history, the potential triggers, the mechanisms, and what to do about that. And as you can see, there are lots of possible mechanisms, because mast cell reactions are part of the immune response. And it can be driven by infection, it can be driven by allergy, it can be driven by toxins, high carbohydrate diets, So the point is, mast cell activation is not a diagnosis, it's the symptom. We have to go back to root causes, you know, what's going on here. And yes, antihistamines are often very helpful, and I'm very happy if you take antihistamines to control the symptoms. But in parallel with that, you have to go back to root causes and ask the question, why? Why have I got mast cell activation? Why am I producing histamine? Okay, Natalie, TMS, tension myositis syndrome, Again, this is not a diagnosis. This is a clinical picture. Just like fibromyalgia is a clinical picture, we have to ask the question why. And my guess is this is the clinical picture of allergic muscles. Tension suggests that they're going into spasm, and that can certainly be an allergic disorder. And on my website, there's a whole article about allergic muscles there. So again, think allergy. Myositis suggests inflammation, and a very common driver of inflammation, which the conventional doctors just don't seem to recognize at all, is allergy to microbes from the upper fermenting gut. And the point here is, if you've got an upper fermenting gut, and if you're eating carbohydrates, it's very likely that you will have an upper fermenting gut. There is potential for these microbes to get from the gut into the bloodstream. It's called bacterial translocation. One example of this is that if you go to the dentist and you have your teeth cleaned or polished or whatever, if you took a blood test, you would find dental bacteria in the bloodstream a few minutes after that dental work was being done. And of course, this is why dentists insist on anybody who has a heart lesion taking antibiotics, because they're always terrified of getting a myocarditis or infection of the valves following a dental procedure and then being blamed for that. But if these microbes get into the bloodstream, they get stuck at distal sites. They get stuck in the muscles, they get stuck in the joints, they get stuck in the skin, and there they drive pathology. So if they get stuck in joints, we get inflammatory arthritides like rheumatoid arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, psoriatic arthritis. If they get stuck in the muscles, we get myositis, we get fibromyalgia. So it's always the story, try to work out the mechanism. And here Natalie asked about repressed emotions, anger, sadness, guilt, or whatever. Now, the point here is that the brain obviously has emotions. And I cannot tell the difference between the brain and the immune system. They both do similar jobs. They're intelligent, they're problem solving, they recognize things, they have their own language, they communicate, dee-da, dee-da, dee-da. And if you have got an angry brain, then you've got an angry immune system, i.e., and that's inflammation. If you've got an inflamed brain, you've got an angry brain. If you've got a sad or depressed brain, then you've got a sad or depressed immune system, which doesn't function as well. So yes, of course, repressed emotions, may well not help. And anything to deal with that, and I don't pretend to be an expert in this, I have to say, is going to be helpful. Okay. Joe Hughes, can we detox from heavy metals safely? Yes, of course we can. I say many of the things that we've already talked about, iodine, vitamin C, help us to detox heavy metals. Obviously, the starting point is not to tox up with them in the first place. So if you've got dental amalgam fillings, get rid of the wretched things. If you use aluminium in your cooking, if you use aluminium deodorants, if you use aluminium, which is in suntan lotions, then get rid of them. The body can get rid of these heavy metals, but if you're toxing up with them as fast as you are detoxing, then it's rather counterproductive. But I say vitamin C helps get rid, iodine helps get rid. My preferred, if I do a test that shows somebody's got high levels of heavy metals, then my preferred mechanism is DMSA. It's a good chelator of heavy metals. It's very safe. It's been well researched, and the regimes, the actual details of how much and how long and how are on the website. Okay. When starting the PK diet, can bad breath and body odor be a sign of liver? Well, it depends how you define bad breath, I suppose. But yes, once you get into ketosis, especially in the early stages, when the body isn't very good at fat burning, it's rather inefficient. You often produce too many ketones and you can exhale them. Now, there are three sorts of ketone. The main one in the blood is beta-hydroxybutyric acid, and that's going to be measured with blood tests. We pee out ketones, and that's acetoacetate that we pee out, or you can exhale them as acetone, and that's what the breath meter detects. As you get into established ketosis, the body gets better at matching up energy demands to energy delivery, and the breath doesn't smell to waffle. And I have to say, I'm pretty much permanent in ketosis, and my daughters are very direct and potentially very rude people. And if I smelt funny, they would, believe me, they would tell me. So it depends what you mean by bad breath. And, when you are keto established, you really shouldn't have bad breath, because some of that can be due to microbes in the mouth, fermenting in the mouth, and that can give you bad breath, dental decay, obviously. Upper fermenting gut, if you're fermenting to produce gases, such as hydrogen sulfide, that can give you bad breath. And then maybe ketones can do the same. So how can constipation be addressed with PK diet is being followed? Good hydration, vitamin C, magnesium, thyroid meds. Well, obviously, fiber is really important. That improves the bulk of the stool. Thyroid medications, make sure you're taking a good dose of them. And then, of course, exercise. We forget exercise, but primitive Mulman was a physically active and busy person. And, exercise physically, jiggles the gut around and gets it moving. And often that has a good effect. And, I'm a great fan of the PK bread. I make a loaf, not every day, but or flatbread at least every other day, and that's very rich in fiber. And with the PK bread, really and truly, you shouldn't get constipated. So I hope that answers your question, Joe. Sandy, what's your thoughts on Paxlovid for treating Coxsackie B? Okay, well, it is an antiviral. I have no experience of using it, but we don't have a specific treatment for Coxsackie B. Funny enough, I was talking with a German doctor recently, and he said, what's so interesting? She does lots of tests at Armin laboratories. And she said, what's so interesting is that all you English people, you all test positive for Coxsackie B, and in Germany it's unusual. Not quite sure why that should be, but Coxsackie B comes up very often on the Armin tests. And there is no specific treatment that I'm aware of for Coxsackie B. And, as we know, ME is characterized by poor energy delivery mechanisms and inflammation. And often that inflammation is infection driven. And believe you me, I see so many people who come to me and they said, oh, I've diagnosed with Lyme. They've gone over to America. They've had intravenous antibiotics. They spent tens of thousands of pounds and they're no better. Ditto, antivirals maybe for treating chronic Epstein-Barr virus infection. And the reason for this is when you have one infection on board, which might be Coxsackie B, it might be Epstein-Barr, it might be Lyme, it might be mycoplasma, you are going to have other infections as well, for the same reason you've got that first infection in, i.e. the immune defenses have been impaired, maybe for years, maybe for decades, and you are prone to picking up all these microbes. So the answer isn't to spend a fortune on tests to try to identify what the microbe is that's causing your disease. The answer is you go back to basics. You give the immune system the energy that it needs to function normally and the raw materials it needs to function normally. And that's all about, dare I say, what I call groundhog regimes, PK diet, sort out the upper fermenting gut, basic package of supplements, vitamin C, iodine. I know I'm being repetitive. I know I'm being boring, but I'm quite sure many of you have logged on this evening because you want to hear that one clue that's that one little, oh, that's going to make you better. I'll do that. And life just isn't like that. The way I explain it to people is that, this is not a battle. This is a war. This is a war that we need to fight for life. It's a war we know we're going to lose. But if I lose that when I'm 102, I will settle for that. Some of you may know there's an old boy I look after who lives in my granny flat. I feed him a paleo-ketogenic diet. I give him lots of vitamins and minerals. I fill him up with B12. I do all the groundhog interventions for him. He has no pathology. He is as sharp as a tack. It's nothing wrong with his brain. And in July, we will celebrate his 101 birthday. So, this is possible. This is all very doable, but it's always back to basics. So for treating Coxsackie B or Lyme or mycoplasma or whatever, we start off with what I call these groundhog regimes to improve energy delivery mechanisms. And then we put in place interventions to reduce the total load of all infections. And it doesn't matter if it's herpes, if it's a viral infection, a bacterial infection, or a fungal infection. We just put in place all these interventions and therefore reduce the work of the immune system. So the obvious one will be herbs. If you look at life from the point of view of a herb, it doesn't want to be attacked by bacteria, viruses, and yeast. All herbs have natural antimicrobials. So use as many herbs and spices in your diet as you possibly can. Chili, pepper, garlic, ginger, turmeric, all these things have wonderful antimicrobial activity. So include those in your diet. And then there are some herbs that come up time and time again as being helpful. I've been through all the books of Stephen Booner. He's a terrific herbalist. But sometimes I think, he lacks specificity. Sometimes he says, well, you could try this and you could try this and you could try the other. But the herbs that come up time and time and time again as being broad spectrum activity, inexpensive, extremely safe, very affordable, can easily be incorporated in the diet are things like cordyceps, Chinese skullcap, rhodiola, ginger. These are all fabulous herbs. So start off with that. But then there are some interventions which I'm now using to reduce the infectious load over and above groundhog. And those three things are DMSO, dimethyl sulfoxide, to break down biofilm and do much more, improve circulation. Methylene blue, which has broad antimicrobial activity. And I think Craig's put it up on the website. If not, I should ask him to do that. And then photodynamic therapy, sunshine. We've had some lovely weather. Get out there and sunbathe in it. The more sunshine you get onto your skin, the greater you will reduce your infectious load. And we know this, in the 1930s, where did people go when they had tuberculosis, but no antibiotics for and no hope? Well, the rich bastards, the one that had the money, they go to Switzerland and they went to the top of the mountain where they sunbathe. And many of them cured their tuberculosis as a result of that. So here we've got, how do we treat Coxsackie bee? How do we treat mold and mycotoxins? Bida-di-da-di-da. And the answer is you do all this stuff that we've talked about. Okay, DIM. Okay, I'm not sure about it. I can't see why it should help with POTS and ME. Yes, it's been used it doesn't make cancer cells worse. It suppresses cancer. Yeah, exactly. So yes, but the point is, if you're treating cancer, you're going to do all this stuff that we're talking about. Yeah, we now know that cancer is not a problem with DNA and nuclei. We now know that cancer is a problem of mitochondria. It's a problem that's in the cytoplasm. We could do a talk about cancer one day if you would like me to do that. And basically, cancer cells switch off their mitochondria, and mitochondria control cell growth. So all these things that we're talking about, all these groundhog regimes, improving your mitochondrial function, ketogenic diet, are all going to stop us from getting cancer and are the starting points to treat cancer. Okay, poor temperature control. Okay, yeah, okay. I have to say, I don't have any easy answers for that. But and there's a whole page on my website, Nicola, about menopausal symptoms and hot flushes. I don't have easy answers for that. But what I do know is that all these interventions we talk about, especially the ketogenic diet, mitigates that enormously. So go keto, maybe do intermittent fasting, and I would be disappointed if those symptoms did not settle down. Okay, Jackie, I'm trying methylene blue. Great. I'm definitely start low and go slow. Da-di-da-di-da. Okay. Well, we don't know the answer to that. And actually, methylene blue is awfully good for our mitochondria. It's one of my favorite multitasking tools. Let me just quickly share with you my methylene blue chapter, which is here. Okay, I hope you can all see that. And you're welcome to have a copy of this. To say, Craig might have put it up on the website. Here you can see all the very desirable properties of methylene blue. Most importantly, improved mitochondrial function. It just reduces the friction in the system by trapping electrons and preventing free radical damage. So methylene blue is going to be helpful for any condition that's associated with poor energy delivery mechanisms. And I've listed those there. Chronic fatigue, heart disease, you can read as well as I can. Cancer, strokes, di-da-di-da-di-da. It's been around for an awful long time. 1880s, it was discovered as a cure for malaria. And any chronic infection may be susceptible for this. And you can activate methylene blue with light. And so this is why sunbathing or using far infrared light in combination with methylene blue is going to be a very powerful tool. This is called photodynamic therapy. It's antiviral. Look at all these viruses that we know it's effective against: hepatitis C, HIV, Zika, Ebola, West Nile, da. It's also evidence suggesting it's effective against many of the herpes viruses. Now, these are a really nasty little group of viruses. I hate them. Of course, Epstein-Barr virus is one of them, but it's good against many of the herpes viruses and COVID-19. It's also antifungal. It's going to inhibit Candida, improve. Well, that's another thing. But it's also an MAOI, so we can use it for depression. So the point is this is going to be a very useful multitasking tool. Now, the dose of methylene blue, always, with any of these new infections, always start with low doses. Now, the joy of methylene blue is it's ever so cheap. 10 grams of methylene blue costs £11, and that's nearly 3 months treatment. So it's gorgeously safe. It's gorgeously cheap. And the potential for side effects is virtually zero. It is an MAOI, which means there are some foods you have to avoid. So do read the sheet which further down about that. But the way to make it up is you dissolve a whole pot, which is 10 grams in a litre of water, and that gives you a 1% solution, which is 10 milligrams per mil. Now, it's a deep blue colour. You can drink it like that, but it doesn't half frighten the horses because you end up with blue teeth and a blue tongue. So I found a way to get round that, which is to mix it with some vitamin C. And what I suggest you do is start off with a low dose, put it in a glass of water, and add 1 or 2 grams of ascorbic acid. Now, it takes a little while for the reaction to take place. It takes about an hour for it to take place. But if you leave it like that, it converts much of the methylene blue to leucomethylene blue, i.e. white methylene blue. It takes a few minutes, but you end up with a pale blue color. Now, in the body, methylene blue switches between leucomethylene blue and methylene blue as it donates and accepts electrons. So it's moving around all the time. What you will find is you will pee blue, and that's the methylene blue coming up. So that tells me that if I take it with ascorbic acid, which is almost colorless, it's a pale blue, it still ends up as methylene blue in the body. And the other thing I know, because of course, I don't ask my patients to do anything without trying it on number one first, is if I stop taking methylene blue, I go on peeing blue for 3 or 4 days. So it's long acting, it stays in the body, so you only have to dose yourself once a day. And the only thing to bear in mind is this is a very mild monoamine oxidase inhibitor, which might explain part of its antidepressive activities. And in theory, if you ate a lot of a food containing tyramine, you get a headache. So aged cheese, sauerkraut, cured meats, beer, and fermented soy products. Well, some of these obviously are going to be out on the PK diet anyway, but just bear in mind that could be an issue. Okay, so that's methylene blue. How do you heal post-Epstein-Barr virus and long COVID? Well, all the stuff that we've talked about, and put in place the anti-infection interventions, because as we've seen from the methylene blue page, it's effective against a whole range of microbes. And the answer is you just keep going until you get a clinical result. Equilibrant, okay, well, that's another antimicrobial. And again, we know from work done by his name will come to my head in a moment, lovely guy, that Oxymetron is often helpful for some. And what that tells me, Kim, is that you've got a microbe which is sensitive to Oxymetron, and it's doing a great job, great work. And the answer is you stay on it, you stay on something until you get better and better and until you plateau. At the point at which you plateau, you can try tailing off the dose. But it's the old story. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And if it's working well for you, stick with it. It's very safe. Okay, Marianne, is HRT ever a good idea? And the answer is a resounding no. HRT and the pill are dangerous medicine. They give you false energy, they're immunosuppressive, and they're carcinogenic. They drive cancer. I've had a whole GMC hearing about this and came out of it smiling. And if you have any doubt about this, look at the Million Women Year HRT study, which looked at 1 million women and followed them up over, the idea is to follow them up over 10 years, taking HRT to see what happened to them. The study had to be stopped at 18 months because of the excess number of deaths in the HRT taking group. So please do not take it. It's dangerous medicine. Okay, Karen, what's your opinion of the cell danger response? Robbie W. Yeah, well, there's no doubt that it exists. And it's a method by which cells protect themselves when there's, overwhelming stress out there. It's a little bit like, if you're attacked by a bear, quite a good reaction is just to collapse and feign death. The bear thinks you're dead. As the bear goes away, then you jump up and run away. Cells do the same. If they perceive that they are being overwhelmed by an infectious stress, maybe, or poor energy delivery mechanisms or whatever, they just say, we're going to go into hibernation. We're going to shut down and shut up and hope that better things will come in the future. So it undoubtedly exists, but the problem is, how do you get people out of it? How do you switch them out of it? And the answer is, we don't know the answer to that, but we just put in place all these interventions and hope that it happens. Now, there are tricks that can be used, like microimmunotherapy. That might be helpful. Methylene blue may be very helpful. Of course, nutrition is helpful because that's an essential part of groundhog regimes. The single most important thing, dare I say, is a ketogenic diet. So often people come to me and they say, oh, yes, I've done this, I've done that, I've done it. And I say to you, have you done a ketogenic diet? And the answer is, no, they haven't. Until you get the fuel in the tank right, then the mitochondria are not going to recover efficiently. And of course, the immune system needs mitochondria. It needs good energy delivery mechanisms in order that it can get rid of any chronic infection. And remember that sugars and carbohydrates feed all infections. All infections, viruses, bacteria, fungi will all be made worse by sugars and carbohydrates. So the starting point is always a keto diet. Okay. I've written after surgery for colon cancer. I thought cancer for the cure may be option. Okay, that's unusual, I have to say. There are possible mechanisms. It may be that when you had your surgery for colon cancer, you changed your microbiome. I don't know. That's hypothesis. But without going into your everything else, I would hate to say why you had a remission after your colon cancer. Of course, remember that something like that, something like surgery, is a major stress on the body. And okay, stress, I would normally expect that to make things worse. But for some people, it can have another effect. Sometimes it will kick the adrenals into life, and that burst of energy from adrenal function results in remission. But what I would say to you is, don't let that stop you putting in place all the groundhog chronic regimes. Don't let that stop you doing a ketogenic diet, because guess what? That's going to help prevent a recurrence of your cancer. Don't let that stop you taking vitamin C and iodine, because guess what? They're both important anti-tumor interventions. Dee-da. Okay. Work on what terms safe activity levels. Okay. Well, the safe activity level is that level of activity that doesn't result in delayed fatigue. The difference between normal fatigue and pathological fatigue is the next day. So guess what? I've had a whole day of working, seeing people, working out things, and I'm working this evening. But tomorrow morning, I shall have a good night's sleep. And tomorrow morning, I shall wake up and I shall be as right as rain. But if I woke up tomorrow morning and I was so fatigued that I couldn't function, then that's pathological fatigue. And that's what determines a safe level of exercise. Even the athletes know this. Even the athletes know that if they overtrain, then they pay for it the next day, they're fatigued the next day, and their performance goes down. There's a lovely example of this that was written up in New Scientist, of an athlete whose ambition, I think he was in his 70s, he was an old boy, I remember that. His ambition was to run a marathon inside 4 hours. And he trained and he trained and he trained, and he couldn't do it, and he couldn't do it, and he couldn't do it. And then he had a fairly minor ankle injury, I think, and he had to rest for a month. And then he went out and ran a marathon, and he ran it easily in less than 4 hours. So overtraining in athletes is the same as normal people, overdoing things, and pathological fatigue in people with ME and fatigue syndrome. So the bottom line is the safe level of exercise is that which does not result in delayed fatigue. And there's another really important reason to do this, and this is called pacing. It's very boring, I know. But delayed fatigue produces a lot of lactic acid, and that inhibits mitochondria. So if you get delayed fatigue, you are slowing your rate of recovery. So I don't like seeing people booming and busting. I know it's very tempting. You get a day and think, oh, I feel a bit better. I'll get that job done and that job done and that job done. But then you pay for it the next day. And overall, you get less done. And most importantly, you recover more slowly. Okay. Healing tendons and muscle with near and far infrared. Yep, good stuff. We know near infrared and far infrared helps accelerates the healing and repair process. So I'm very happy for you to do that. And whilst you're healing and repairing, also give your tendons and muscles the raw materials that they need for healing and repair. Of course, the best, the most comprehensive is going to be bone broth, but that's a bit of a faff to make and get. So things like glucosamine, chondroitin sulfate, MSM, these are all useful interventions to give your tendons and muscles the raw material for healing and repair. Boron, I love boron. There's a wonderful paper that you can easily Google called Nothing Boring About Boron. So you should remember that, shouldn't you? And it details the multiplicity of ways that boron is so helpful in the body. And we should be taking at least 3 milligrams a day. And that's, of course, in the sunshine salt. But for any arthritic condition, certainly 9 and maybe 20 milligrams a day of boron. That's going to be additionally helpful. And we need boron for normal calcium and magnesium metabolism. With recent research, hyperglycemia and long COVID, yes, of course you must treat it. And the point here is that hypercoagulation, which is sticky blood, goes with inflammation. If you're in an inflamed state, you've got sticky blood. If you've got sticky blood, you're in an inflamed state. The two go together, and it's a very dangerous state to be in. Because you've got sticky blood, you can get arterial blockaging, thrombosis, di-da. So we need to put in place all interventions to reduce inflammation and to reduce sticky blood. Now, I hardly dare say this because you'll think I'm being really boring, but the thing that makes for sticky blood is sugar and carbohydrates. And the most anti-inflammatory thing you can do for your body is a ketogenic diet. Ketones are markedly anti-inflammatory. Number 2 is probably vitamin D. Number 3 is probably vitamin C. But yes, of course, we must treat the hypercoagulable status. Okay, given the positive, this is Martin Schaller again. Long COVID heart with non-invasive vagus. Okay, this is a wise treatment. Well, you wouldn't start off with that. Some of you might like to look at the work of Dawn Wiley, who set up a website called A Vagus Adventure, where she gives much more specific advice on this. But you always you would start off by treating POTS with improving energy delivery mechanisms, because postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome is symptomatic of low cardiac output. And you would treat that, say, by improving energy delivery mechanisms, all the stuff that we've talked about. Are you aware of Alain Moreau's work in if you different clusters near me? Well, I have to say I have looked at his work, but I don't think it has much clinical application, because what he's talking about is different clinical pictures. Like, it might be a bit of this, a bit of that, or a bit of the other. But whatever the clinical picture is, if the fundamental problem is ME, then ME is comprised of poor energy delivery mechanisms and inflammation. And you go back to the groundhog regimes, as I call them, and you put in place all the interventions to address poor energy delivery mechanisms, all the stuff we talked about. And then you look at all the mechanisms that drive inflammation, which is allergy, autoimmunity, and chronic infection, all the stuff that we're talking about. So, trying to break down the clinical picture of ME into this picture or that picture or the other, I don't think is going to get us very far. What we are interested in is the why. We're interested in mechanisms, because if you can determine the why, then that has obvious implications for management. Potential effects of the use of nicotine patches. I have to say, I have no experience of using nicotine patches. Again, what you have to remember, I mean, okay, I can see the theory of that to tweak acetylcholine. But what you have to remember is that when we talk about energy delivery mechanisms, we're talking about the production of the energy molecule ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Now, ATP is not just an energy molecule. It's also a neurotransmitter in its own right. To be precise, it's a co-transmitter. And what this means is that all our neurotransmitters, acetylcholine, adrenaline, noradrenaline, dopamine, GABA, serotonin, none of them work unless you've got ATP. They all need an ATP molecule with them to function. So what I would say is I can't see the benefit of kind of fine tuning with a bit of nicotine here or a bit of serotonin here or a bit of GABA if you're not producing energy. If you've got ATP there, all our neurotransmitters are going to work so much better. So I would concentrate your fire on that. Recently, I've come upon black seed oil papers. Well, black seed oil, I'm ashamed to say, if you're talking about Nigella sativa, is it Nigella? Which is the cumin blacks. If you're talking about cumin base, then we know that has antimicrobial properties. So yes, it may well be helpful. Well, because it's an oil, and many oils have got very helpful essential fatty acids within them, which are going to help energy delivery mechanisms. But many of them are directly antimicrobial. So if it's made a difference, it may be because it's reducing their infectious load. Nicotine test. Okay, we talked about that. I'm not quite sure that I'd be a fan of that. Microclots. Well, yes, that is the problem. Microclots, as I say, they go with inflammation. We've touched upon this already. If you're inflamed, then you're in a hypercoagulable state, and with the potential for cells to stick to each other and therefore produce microclots. And that's going to have devastating impact on, of course, energy delivery mechanisms, of course, the brain, well, any organ in the body you claim to mention. If you switch off the blood supply, you're switching off fuel delivery and oxygen, and that's a disaster. So yes, I think it's very likely that microclots are forming. And of course, the major driver of clotting that we're seeing in the modern world now is a spike protein. And okay, spike protein, yes, it's a part of acute COVID, but it can be the malign manifestations of spike protein can be hugely mitigated by all the interventions we've learned about. Vitamin D, vitamin C, the infectious load reduced with ivermectin, with hydroxychloroquine, dee-da. The real problem is the wretched vaccine, because what the mRNA vaccines do, in fact, they are not vaccines. They're actually gene therapies. The problem with these is they turn the body into a factory that produces spike protein. So as a result of mRNA vaccinations, we are exposed to massive levels of spike protein, which is markedly pro-inflammatory and markedly pro-coagulation. And this explains the myocarditis, the strokes, the heart attacks, the vascular events we're seeing in people who've been vaccinated. So that is undoubtedly a problem. Okay, so I think I've zipped through all those questions there. So let me have a quick look at the chat box and see if I can look at some of those. Okay, so if I put that there, I can see those better. Okay, so if I screened, you can probably see the chat box yourself, can't you? So let's go back. Oh my goodness. Now, what I can tell you is I'm not going to be able to get through all these questions before my voice runs out. So let me just go through the ones that, okay, I've done those ones. Okay, can you overdose on pregnenolone? Well, it would be difficult. And it's the old story with all these supplements. There's an optimum amount, and you can take too little and too much. And the usual dose of pregnenolone would be between 25 milligrams for little people and hang on, I've lost me. 25 milligrams for little people and 100 milligrams for bigger people. Hang on, I've just what have I done wrong here? There we go. Okay. Righty-ho. Okay. Do you need to take vitamin K with vitamin D? Well, sometimes with these supplements, it's difficult to know when to stop because they all seem like a good idea. But a healthy microbiome that is well fed with fiber should be able to synthesize all the vitamin K that we need. So I don't routinely advocate vitamin K. I say sometimes it's difficult to know where to stop. Hey, you don't want to be here unless you see the app. Okay. Why does the sun and heat wipe me out? Okay. And the answer is because it makes you hot. And when we get too hot, the body has to lose heat, and it does that through the skin. Now, the skin is the largest organ in the body. And when you pump lots of blood to the skin, you increase cardiac output by about 20%. So that's why we all feel a bit more tired on a hot day, or we can do, because we're having to increase cardiac output. But people who have fatigue syndromes, they're already on the edge of maximum energy delivery mechanisms. And to be asked to produce another 20% is exhausting. So that doesn't surprise me that the sun and heat wipes you out. But what I'd love you to do is get sunshine, but maybe with a fan, so it doesn't make you too hot. But sunshine has so many beneficial effects. Okay, Amy, my toes are killing me. I'm trying to get my uric acid down. Okay, but you use remained around 3. Okay. Well, uric acid, we have to get rid of uric acid, and the main source of that is fructose. It's also a mycotoxin, so being exposed to molds will be an issue, and it can come from protein. But yeah, you absolutely must get that down. What you might find quite useful is on Amazon, you can buy a little device to measure your own uric acid. And if you have a problem with that, then you can measure it regularly. And what's so interesting is it does fluctuate quite a lot. It's not it doesn't stay stable. And then you'll be able to discern which foods are the problems to you or which environmental exposures are a problem to you. But it's the old story, must go keto. Guy, is amino acid supplementation therapy worth the money? I don't think so, no. There was a great vogue for this in the late 1980s, and people were spending a fortune getting their amino acids measured, and then they were going to America and they were getting tailored amino acid packages with a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of the other. And I have to say, it was jolly expensive, and I wasn't that impressed by the results. The point here is if you're eating a keto diet, you've got a non-fermenting upper gut, you'll A, digest protein extremely well, and B, absorb amino acids extremely well. So you really shouldn't need amino acid supplementation. Please can you tell us which brand of keto meter you have? They're all much of a muchness. This one is just called Keto Meter. But on my website, I think there is certainly Craig's Facebook group. People have listed the keto meters which they think suit best. The thing to remember about keto meters is you can get false positive with them and you get false negatives with them. So use them wisely. So if, for example, you've got an upper fermenting gut, that will produce alcohol, and that will give you a false positive because these react to alcohol in the same way that they react to ketones. Similarly, I find if I had a little sip of a hot drink, maybe even herbal tea or a coffee, then that might give me a false negative reading. So the details of what gives you false positive and false negatives are obviously in the PK, why and the how. Any suggestions for alternative to HRT to help perimenopause, mood, emotional? Yeah, you do the keto diet and you sort your thyroid. And that sorts out many of the perimenopausal issues. Those are two big issues. The one thing, it's not brilliant for the hot flushes, but it does greatly mitigate them. And as I say, there's more stuff on my website about that. How can I get into keto if you're hypothyroid? Well, the same as everybody else. Having hypothyroidism doesn't stop you getting into ketosis, but the difference is when you are in ketosis, you're fat burning with adrenaline, and that's what gives you the wired but tired feeling, and that's called ketogenic hypoglycemia. A dreadful name, but it's a pointer that you have an underactive thyroid. So sounds like you need my book, or rather our book, the Underactive Thyroid, Do It Yourself because your doctor won't. Closet, closest I can find for a groundhog. Oh, that's Craig to everyone. Okay. Oh, he's giving you a picture. Thank you, Craig. Sorry about that. You shouldn't be listening to this, Craig. You know it all. And you've written the books. Okay. DHEA instead of HRT. Well, it'll help. It's not, it won't switch off the hot flushes like estrogen and progesterone do, but it will help. Can you suggest anything for congested nose? Okay. Well, it's the old story, we have to ask the question why. And the commonest reason for congested nose is allergy to dairy products. And that's all dairy products: milk, yogurt, cheese, cream, and also butter. This is what got me interested in the whole issue of ecological medicine. I had dairy allergy and had a chronic snotty, runny nose, postnasal drip, you name it. And by dint of cutting out all dairy products, that disappeared completely. And even today, this is 40 years of no dairy. If I have butter, I still get a snotty nose. So that's the first thing. Number 2 is probably yeast. That's a major deriver of. But number 3 is probably chronic infection. And what you have to do then is get the nose clear and keep it clear. So use the iodine salt pipe. And for anybody who hasn't seen how to use this, it's dead easy. Salt pipe, Lugol's iodine, a couple of drops in there. As you can see, it's a brown. I hope you can see that's a brown drop. 1, 2. Give a little shake to stop the iodine going straight out the bottom, and then sniff it. So I put my finger and thumb over I know it's the mouthpiece, but you're going to sniff it and sniff it. And keep sniffing. And that helps to open the nose up. And if you can smell it, you're getting a therapeutic dose. But if you've got chronic infection of the nasal passages or the sinuses or the back of the throat, that will get rid of it. Now, if the nose is blocked, then maybe put some wintergreen in there or some eucalyptus or some Vicks or whatever initially to get it open. And then once it's open, always nose breathe. Maybe tape your mouth at night, because the business of nose breathing keeps it from being blocked. As soon as you mouth breathe, the nose blocks up because it's not being used. It's the old story, if you don't use it, you lose it. So those interventions usually clear a nose, and maybe do breathing exercises, one nostril at a time, and then the other nostril to make sure that nose is clear. Okay. What if you have a hiatus hernia, and that is why I prescribe PPI? Well, hiatus hernia is part of the upper fermenting gut. And I think hiatus hernia is a ridiculous diagnosis, quite honestly. I don't think it exists, as we believe it. Hiatus hernia just means you're getting reflux. And the reason that happens is because if you've got an upper fermenting gut, then you've got a leaky gut. And if you've got a leaky gut, you cannot concentrate acid in the lumen of the stomach. Now, the plug hole of the stomach, the pyloric sphincter, is acid sensitive. So when you eat a meal, you dilute the acid in the stomach and the plug hole closes, and the food remains in the stomach until a sufficient acidity has been achieved. And that sufficient acidity is there to sterilize the stomach contents, to digest protein, and to start the absorption of minerals. Now, if you've got a PPI, you can't acidify the upper gut. And therefore, the plug hole remains shut because it's acid sensitive. And so after maybe an hour and a half, the stomach says, oh, time to empty now, and starts to contract, but the plug hole is shut. And the food refluxes back up the esophagus and gives you reflux, heartburn, burping, acidity, nocturnal cough, dee-da. Now, the point about PPIs is that, as I say, it does nothing for upper gut function. All it does is neutralize stomach acid. So you get the reflux, but you don't feel it because it's not acidic. But you still get the reflux, you still get the malabsorption, you still get the upper fermenting gut, you still get the leaky gut, you still get microbial translocation. So that's why I hate PPIs. So if you've got a hiatus hernia, you've got to go PK, you've got to get up to speed with vitamin C and the iodine, and then you should be able to tail off the PPIs. Okay, is summer a good time to ease a bit from the keto diet? Okay, well, the seasons are irrelevant. The point is, when we put in place interventions, what we want to do is to get better. And getting well is like building a house. We start with the foundation stones, and then we put the walls and ceilings and the windows and the roof and so on. I want to see people getting better. And you put in place all interventions necessary in order to improve. And then you will get to a level, which hopefully will be a high level, at which you're feeling well, you're functioning at a good level, maybe holding down a job or whatever. And at that point, you can do a deal with the devil. Can I get away with a bit of this? Can I get away with a bit of that? But don't come off the keto diet. Well, actually, you shouldn't come off the keto diet ever, because, as I say, it's preventing us from getting nasty pathology. The occasional relapse is fine. And guess what? I'm not a paragon of virtue. At the moment, the garden is full of strawberries. And can I resist them? No, of course I can't. So, I will have a bowl of strawberries for my pudding. But, I might, I don't know, I'll check, I'll see if I'm in ketosis now. But the point is, by tomorrow morning, I'll definitely be back in ketosis again. So let's just see when that counts down if I'm in ketosis now, having had my bowl of strawberries. So the point is, it's never a good time not to be in ketosis, but the occasional indiscretion doesn't matter. So this is the ketone breath meter. It counts down, and when it gets to 2, 1, blow. Okay, it's beeping at me, so that's the time to stop blowing. So I'm in, it'll tell us in a moment. Okay, so I've got 13.5 parts per million of ketones. So my bowl of strawberries didn't knock me out of ketosis. So that's why that's so useful. Okay, we've talked about nicotine patches. Okay, somebody's raving about it. Senol, it's amazing. Okay, try that then. Anti-supplements diet during cancer treatment. Okay, the treatment of cancer is exactly the same as the treatment of chronic fatigue syndrome. The most important bit being the ketogenic diet. Yeah, absolutely do it all. And I don't say I see a lot of cancer patients, but I see a few. And of course, by the time you've got cancer, you've already lost the battle. You've already got trillions of cancer cells that are striving to kill you. And so, yes, of course, in the early stages, you must use whatever surgery, whatever radiotherapy, whatever chemotherapy is needed to get the total load of cancer down. But of course, what kills people, generally speaking, is not the primary tumor, it's the spread, it's the metastases. And so then we have to put in place all these interventions to reduce our chance of secondary disease and metastases. And again, the most important bit part is the ketogenic diet. And again, if you as a group would like me to do a cancer talk, then of course I can do that, and its relationship to mitochondria. But vitamin C to bowel tolerance is very important. Iodine, herbs, we know, are very important. But most important is have a very positive mental attitude. And if any of you have got cancer, there's a fabulous book written by Kelly Turner called Radical Remission. And she went around the world interviewing people who had got rid of their cancer. These are all people who'd had the chemotherapy, the radiotherapy, they'd had all the treatment. They were told there's nothing left for you. You're going to die in a couple of months. And they said, blow that for monkeys. I'm jolly well going to get well. And they've made radical changes to their diet, to their supplements. They did heating regimes. They took charge of their own health, and they all had radical remissions. So, but the basic workup is all the stuff we talked about today, of which the diet is the most important. Any suggestions for serious sugar addiction? Well, you've just got to do it. I know there isn't an easy way. It's a little bit like people giving up smoking or people giving up alcohol. You've just got to jolly well do it. And sometimes the prospect of having to do it is far worse than the reality. And once you get onto the keto diet established and maybe taking benfotiamine, obviously maybe take some carnitine, maybe getting the thyroid sorted out, the sugar cravings just fade away. And you have to treat sugar like cocaine. It's just as addictive. It's probably just as toxic. And, we know that the cocaine addict just has to say no to everything. We know the person that gives up smoking has to say no to every hint of cigarette or tobacco. We know the alcoholic has to say no to any drop of alcohol, because otherwise it just simply switches on the craving. So good old, so Craig said it again, groundhog again, well done. I have fatigue, predominantly brain fog, severe bloating. Well, severe bloating is typical of the upper fermenting gut. So if you've got severe bloating, you've got upper fermenting gut. So all the stuff we have to talk about, we've spoken about. And of course, if you've got an upper fermenting gut, you're fermenting to produce alcohol, delactate, hydrogen sulfide, and all of these will cause foggy brain. We know people who have liver failure, same thing, because these products of fermenting gut are getting straight to the brain and causing foggy brain. Okay, so Sterling, estrogen, progesterone, low progesterone, okay. Now, I never measure sex hormones. I never measure estrogen and progesterone or testosterone because they are downstream from poor energy delivery mechanisms. And this is nature's way of saying you've not got the energy for babies. Until you can improve energy delivery mechanism, it's not right that you should have babies because you haven't got the energy to deal with them. And the way it stops you having babies is the lower levels of estrogen and progesterone. So you don't feel sexy and maybe you're even infertile. So the way to tackle levels of sex hormones is to improve energy delivery mechanisms, not to take HRT or the pill, which gives us false energy and we know are carcinogenic and potentially dangerous. Okay, any thoughts or experience of nattokinase to reduce microclots? Well, the way to reduce microclots is the ketogenic diet, stop it being sticky in the first place. And what is of proven benefit, and nattokinase in theory would work, but what is of proven benefit is DMSO. And in fact, that's being used. You can inject DMSO intravenously in people who had acute strokes or TIAs to dissolve the clots. It works fabulously well. It's gloriously cheap. Anybody can take it, and a good dose would be 20 ml a day. Okay. Yeah, Stephen Booner died. I think he had pulmonary fibrosis. He had some bizarre pulmonary condition, but yeah, he was a lovely guy. As the brain fog, muscle stiffness, pins and needles continue. Well, again, brain fog we've talked about. Muscle stiffness, I think that has much to do, well, it can be allergic. It can be to do with fourth phase water, i.e. you've got sticky muscles, and again, DMSO would help for that. Pins and needles in the feet and the legs, that's peripheral neuropathy. And the commonest cause of that is sugar damage. So again, it's keto diet. But you need to get, if you've got pins and needles in your feet and legs, you need to be checked for diabetes, get your glycosated hemoglobin measured at the very least. And benfotiamine, as we've discussed, that can often reverse the peripheral neuropathy of diabetics. So, but do get your bloods checked for hemoglobin, for glycosated hemoglobin, and you've got to go keto. What can you do to lessen POTS symptoms? Well, it's the old story. Improve energy delivery mechanisms is absolutely the starting point. Oh, thank you, Craig. That's the Methylene Blue link. You mentioned you're doing A&M Senawite. Yep, that's right. That's a good point. If anybody would like to hear the oxygen thing, which we haven't got time for now, then do log on the 20th of June, 7 p.m. If you go to the AONM website, then we're going to talk about that then. What are your thoughts on nicotine? Okay, done that. Methylene blue. Now we think we found a source of it. So hopefully it'll be available soon. I'll check with Helen tomorrow, and always email me and ask, but it's in the pipeline. Okay, nicotine patches disrupt. Okay, I didn't know that. Can stimulants such as Ritalin be used to help with the severe symptoms of the pain? Well, it's like taking speed. It's false energy. I've never prescribed Ritalin. I've never used it. I'm not entirely approving of its use in autism and ADHD, simply because it's symptom suppression. It's not getting at the root cause. And so it's really not a long-term solution. Are unvaccinated at risk from shedding and spike protein? Well, possibly yes. We don't know for sure, but it's certainly biologically plausible, because we know that people who are vaccinated shed the spike protein. They manufacture the stuff in their body. So of course they're shedding it. And arguably, yes. I mean, hopefully the dose will be much less. And hopefully, if you've got good levels of vitamin D and vitamin C, our bodies will be able to cope with that. But yes, the unvaccinated are at risk from the vaccinated. What do you advise to have for children aged 10 to with 18 months longer? Well, exactly the same stuff that we've been talking about. The children, all kids should be doing a ketogenic diet. Another book that Craig and I wrote, Green Mother, is all about how we can apply these principles to pregnancy, infertility, breastfeeding, the baby's immune system, rearing the baby, either whole of child rearing, obstetrics and pediatrics thrown in together. And yes, children should be, in fact, the imperative to treat children the same is overwhelming, because they're so much more susceptible to these interventions. So the advice is exactly the same. Age 10, 2 children, yep, they must do the same as we talked about. Okay, I managed to stay in ketosis but eat small amount of carbs twice a day. Is that fine? Okay, yes, that's fine. If you're in ketosis, That's good enough for me. And of course, sugars and carbohydrates, they are essential for a system, but not as a fuel. They are essential as the raw material to make ATP. ATP starts off life as a 5-carbon sugar. So does DNA, so does RNA. They're nucleotides. So sugars and carbohydrates are essential for the business of making ATP, DNA, and RNA. They're also essential for the purposes of detoxification, and that pathway in the liver is called the glucuronidation pathway. But the trouble is they're very addictive, and we tend to overeat them. So if you can have a little bit of carbohydrate and stay in ketosis, then that's absolutely fine by me. Is it okay to stay on LDN longer term? I can't see no reason why not. Essentially, it stimulates endogenous production of opiates, which endorphins they're called, which are anti-inflammatory. So very happy for you to stay on that. As vitamin T supports clotting, would you advise on reducing it if dealing with the microclot problem? No. Vitamin K is far more subtle than that. And I learned this from a Dutch professor. His name won't come into my head. But vitamin K has the interesting property of it lines blood vessels. It sticks to blood vessels and lines them. And when the blood vessel is intact, it inhibits clotting. And when the blood vessel is broken, it stimulates clotting. And of course, that's a totally desirable state of affairs. So vitamin K is an essential vitamin, and I don't think you could overdose with it. It would be very difficult to overdose with it. I'm still taking ivermectin once a week. You don't need to take it. You really don't need to take ivermectin to prevent COVID. The interventions we already have, the iodine salt pipe, the vitamin C, the keto diet, are more than enough to prevent us from getting COVID. And the fact of the matter is that we have all had COVID. Now, you might not have had symptoms of it, or you might not know you've got it, but we've all had it. And therefore, we've all got natural immunity to it. And what we don't want to do is mess up that natural immunity with vaccines, because we now know that vaccines switch off natural immunity. So long as you haven't been vaccinated, and we know that vaccines increase your risk of getting COVID, they increase your risk of hospitalization, they increase your risk of transmitting it to somebody else. They do absolutely nothing that they were supposed to be doing. So as long as you've not been vaccinated, you really don't need ivermectin weekly. Vitamin C, vitamin D, keto diet does it all. Has any research been done relating to poor sleep in ME/CFS? Well, of course, sleep is absolutely vital to us all, not just ME and fatigue patients, not just fatigue syndrome patients. We all need a good night's sleep. And poor quality sleep is a risk factor for pretty much any pathology you care to mention. Heart disease, cancer, dementia, lack of sleep increases your risk of. So the major disturber of sleep, dare I say, is sugars and carbohydrates. Why? Because if you're running your bodies on sugars and your carbohydrates, your blood sugar's up and down and up and down, and then you're spiking adrenaline on a regular basis. And it's that spiking adrenaline at night that disturbs sleep so often. So the starting point again, ketogenic diet. In our books, there's much more about sleep. In fact, there's a whole webpage about sleep that you can go through, because I could speak all evening about sleep and miss out on some of these questions, but there's some good information there. And yes, of course, sleep is vital. Okay, hormone tests that showed high estrogen and high prolactin. Couldn't find any. Okay, well, prolactin's a funny one. We do sometimes see high prolactin, and I can only think it's a pituitary problem. It doesn't have much implications for management. And all I can say, and I know this isn't a very good answer, but if you put in place all these regimes, the level seems to come down. If you do have very high prolactin, you probably do need a scan just to make sure you don't have a tumor of the pituitary, but that's probably been done already. I'm hoping that's been done already. Pituitary tumors are rare, thankfully, but they can present with high prolactin. And of course, if you're breastfeeding, then you have a high prolactin, but I'm presuming AJ to everyone isn't. Okay, LNG to everyone, basic protein vitamins, it's worked well. Diagnosis of POTS. Okay, that's really interesting. You had a postpartum hemorrhage where you obviously lost a lot of blood. Now, you're describing Sheehan syndrome, Sheehan''S. And if you it typically occurs after birth, where you've lost a lot of blood, because the blood pressure can drop precipitously and you can damage your pituitary gland as a result. And in that case, you have to look very closely at thyroid function and adrenal function, because that's often impaired as a result. I cannot shift the shortness of breath. Okay, well, the shortness of breath may well be actually hyperventilation. So log on to the AONM website web on the 20th of June, and I'm going to be talking about oxygen delivery mechanisms then. Okay, I've heard that once you have cancer, vitamin C can help it grow. Rubbish. Once you've got cancer, vitamin C kills it. But it kills it best on a ketogenic diet, because the ketogenic diet starves the cancer cells. They then look for sugar, because that's what they love to ferment, and vitamin C looks just like sugar. So they absorb the vitamin C, and that kills them. So no, that's nonsense, that the vitamin C helps cancer cells grow. Do sufferers have more chance of getting cancer? Nobody's done that study, but my guess is that if it's untreated, if they're not doing the ketogenic diet and all else, then they probably do increase their risk of cancer, because we know it's a mitochondrial lesion. So this is another reason why it's so important to put in place all these regimes, not only to improve your present fatigue, but also to prevent yourself getting cancer, heart disease, and dementia. Okay, I have to say, we've got to 8 o'clock, in fact, a bit past it. I have a little hound that has to be taken out for a walk, and I like to get to bed by 9 o'clock. Oh, Gillian's very kindly put in the link there for you to all to register at the oxygen webinar, so please do that. Somebody said that they think a webinar on cancer would be good fun, so I can certainly do that. And I'm afraid I just absolutely can't quite get through all the other questions. I'll have a quick look, see if there are any vital ones that aren't obviously answered in my book or website. Yeah, when you take pregnenolone and Metaviv sublingually, yeah, you can chew it all up and swallow it all. That's no problem. Yes, you must remove your progesterone implant. They're lethal. How much iodine at bedtime? 3 drops of Lugol's iodine in a glass of water. My 10-year-old son's constant severe headache for 18 months. Okay, it's probably allergy. And number 1 allergen is dairy products. Number 2 is gluten grains. So your 10-year-old lad, I'm so sorry, poor boy, must do the ketogenic diet. Okay, I think I've covered most of them. So I'm going to say a big thank you for Martin and AONM for hosting this. That's very kind of you. Poor Martin has to sit up an extra 2 hours at night and listen to me waffling on. Thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you, Katie and Craig, for putting the word round. And do let me have feedback if you think it's any good, if it's enjoyable or useless. I'm very happy to accept any advice or comments. And we're going to do these regularly every couple of months. So we'll put out the date for the next one. And I will say good night to you all, and thank you all again. Bye for now. Bye-bye. Okay. So I think I just have to, I think Martin has to, I'm going to leave, and hopefully